Hey, everybody, welcome into Live with Greg this Sunday night. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so thrilled to be talking to Stephanie Sinkfield tonight, and she is an insurance agent with State Farm. How's it going?
Doing good, Greg. Thank you for having me.
You know, tonight we're talking about a very important conversation, and this is about life insurance. And this is a conversation a lot of people don't like to talk about. And for you, before we talk about what we're going to talk about tonight, you have also you've been dealing with this for a number of years, working with so many families when it comes to life insurance. But this is something that is personal to you. Why is it so important to you?
Well, Greg, my husband passed away actually almost a year ago. And having to put someone that you love, your husband away or a parent away, is one of the most intimate things that you can do. So I've witnessed it, I've lived it, I've done it very recently. And I have a passion for it too. So it means a lot to me to be able to talk about it.
So tonight, for people who don't know, why is life insurance so important?
Well, Greg, life insurance to me is important for a number of reasons. One of the biggest things it does is it leaves an inheritance for your family or for your children. And that's one of the things that we don't talk a lot about, but leaving an inheritance for your children so that they're able to go ahead and live through their life and go through the grieving process without worrying about the financial process is super, super important. And it's also what I call the great divider. It actually really divides you as far as the legacy that you leave for your family, whether you're going to be financially fit, financially strong, or whether they're going to be financially weak. So to me, that's one of the biggest reasons we all need to have life insurance.
We've heard this conversation before. What's the difference between term and whole life insurance?
Okay. A big difference. And what I typically tell people when people ask me, well, which one would you prefer? What do you talk about most? I say, well, I talk about both. I think whether you have term insurance or you have whole life insurance, they're both very, very good products. The biggest difference is term insurance is typically something that you carry for a certain amount of time. So in the industry these days, we have a 10-year term, a 20-year term, a 30-year term, and some insurance companies are having 40-year terms. And what that means is you invest a certain amount of money for that term, that 10-year, 20-year, 30 years. And if something happens to you, we will pay within that term. Once that term runs out, your policy will either increase and you'll pay more money, or the policy will dissolve. So we kind of compare that. We say a term policy is kind of like renting a policy. You don't build any cash value and it only lasts for a certain amount of time. Whereas a whole life policy is a policy that once you lock that premium in, you pay that same premium for the whole or the rest of your life, and it builds cash value. So that's the biggest difference between the two.
I know I heard Susie Orman talk a lot about, buying term and investing the difference. Mm-hmm. Can you explain that?
I can't. Susie Orman, Dave Ramsey, they're both big fans of buying term and investing the difference. And I think the ideology is great. What I typically find, though, is people don't do both. They may buy term and they don't invest the difference, which basically means pay a little bit less for a life insurance policy and take the money you have left over and invest it in either a home or stocks, mutual funds, those types of things. But the problem with that is people hear that and they may invest in a term policy, but they don't do the rest of it. So if you're going to buy term and invest the difference, you really need to make sure that you're following through.
When you think about insurance, a lot of people may say, it's too expensive. I don't want to invest in it. Mm-hmm. Is it really expensive?
You know what, Greg, our mortality rates are starting to increase, which means that people are starting to live longer. And as a result, life insurance is less expensive. Every year, life insurance gets less and less expensive because people are living longer. And so it's really not expensive at all, especially if you invest in it at a young age. And that's one of the things that I encourage people to do. When you have a child at 0 age, it's the best time to buy life insurance on them because that's the cheapest that you're ever going to find it. So, and it can be expensive. The older you get, the more expensive it gets because life insurance is based on your age and your sex, whether you're male or female. And it also is based on your health. So it can be more expensive the older you get.
A lot of people may say, I had a friend of mine, I'm gonna give a story. A friend of mine, she was talking to me one time about a family friend, and this particular family friend they thought had life insurance, and the person who sold the family friend life insurance sold them, this particular person, an accidental death policy. And so when this particular person passed away, they went to the insurance person and they said he had an accidental death policy and the insurance did not pay out. How important is it for people to have those hard conversations with mom, with dad, with grandma, auntie, uncle? Because a lot of people don't like to have those conversations.
Well, you just made two good points, Greg. Let me go back to accidental insurance, if you don't mind. Most of the time, people purchase accidental insurance through a bank or through a mortgage company. And accidental insurance only is going to pay if you die from an accident. And that accident is going to be determined based on the policy. So all policies are different. So it depends on that what that company says an accident is considered. I'm not a big fan of those because people die of COVID, people die of cancer, people die in their sleep, and those are not considered accidental situations, which means that those policies don't pay. So what I tell people is you need to buy a life insurance policy that is going to pay no matter how you die. And I think it's very, very important for us to talk to our family and even our close friends, our village, about if something happens to you, how do I access your financial information, your insurance, your will, your power of attorney, your trust, those types of things, so that you're not caught in the dark if something happens to a family member.
So, a lot of people don't like to have those conversations. And if you have a family friend or a parent who does not want to have the conversation, what advice, because you've been dealing with this for a number of years, what advice do you have for people to help crack into people to get them to start opening up about what they do have?
Well, you know what? I think the advent of Zoom has been great, especially during COVID. I have had talks with my family members. We've had Zoom calls and we've all said, okay, if something happens to you, where do I go? And, people say, well, I've got it in the safe at the house. It's underneath my bed. It's under my pillow. It's in my closet. But, I really think if you're a child and you have an aging parent, you really, really need to be aware of where all of their confidential information is. And you also need to encourage them to have a will. Because if someone passes away and they don't have a will or they don't have beneficiaries on their policy, their money and their items go into an estate, which is managed by the city or the jurisdiction that they live in. And I tell people all the time, you don't want a stranger to make a decision about how your assets are going to be divided. So I think it's really, really important to have those hard conversations.
When you think about, this is a conversation that a lot of celebrities, I've noticed, Aretha Franklin, her situation, or some other people who've been out there who didn't have their things in the row. For people that are watching tonight, what advice would you give them if they need to look into getting a will and making sure they have their beneficiaries lined up and everything in place?
The biggest advice for me, what I tell people is you always need to make sure that you have a great insurance agent, a great attorney, and a great accountant. I think that those are the three things, and a great financial advisor too. You can add that person to the mix, but I really think that, and there are ways that you can do wills online. You can go to Rocket Lawyer and you can go to some other places like that. And I think that those are good. They're great. But if you have considerable assets, or even if you have children, I think it's great to seek an attorney's advice so that they can make sure that you're following state laws and local laws, because every state is different. And so I really think it's a great idea to not only have a great insurance agent, but to have a great attorney that can give you some really good advice.
And when you talk about children, a lot of people don't realize this. You can't leave money to anyone under 18. Is that correct?
In the state of Tennessee, if you leave money to anyone under 18 without them having someone who is over that money, leaving that to them, that money will go into what we call a Uniform Gift Act, which basically means that money is going to be managed by a judge. They're going to appoint a trustee, and then they're going to manage that money for that child until they turn 18. You do not want that. It's best to have a will, so that if something happens to you before the child reaches majority, you can, by that will or that trust, tell whoever you want to manage the money what you want them to do.
We do have a question in the comment section. I'm going to bring this up. Amelia McGriff Henderson says, some people are underinsured. Someone sold my aunt a $5,000 policy.
Mm-hmm. You know what? If you have a parent, an aunt, or an uncle who's probably over age 50 or 60, they probably have a policy like that. We call those debit agents that would go around to our parents and our grandparents' house, and they would sell them a $5,000 policy, $7,000 policy, $10,000 policy. What I would say about that is keep paying that policy and don't let it cancel, because your aunt may be at a point where she can't afford, or another family member can't afford to buy her more insurance because of her age. But there are several things that you can do if you've got smaller policies. You can pre-plan, which means you can go to a funeral home and talk to them about going ahead and paying for your funeral expenses up front. And then you can also go to cemeteries and go ahead and prepay for your opening and your closing. Because remember, if you do that now, you're locking in the current price so that you're not paying a future price to do that. So yeah, they may be underinsured, but the good thing is they do have some insurance. And it's probably not too late to look into insurance for them. You can buy insurance on someone up to age 80.
Wow. Another
Okay.
question this evening. Is there any way to vet insurance agencies or companies to avoid scams?
Absolutely. Every insurance company receives a rating. You want to look for a company that has at least an A+ rating. Some companies like State Farm, we're A++ agency, which means that these are companies that are very, they have great reputations, they have financial strength, they have great people that work for them. But you absolutely want to make sure you deal with a reputable insurance company. That's super important.
Another question for you. A lot of people, because of COVID-19, have two questions. The first one, is it true your life insurance policy will not pay out if you die of COVID-19?
That is not true. Let me just explain a little bit about how insurance companies pay and they don't pay. That's why, we talked about accidental insurance, making sure that you have a policy that doesn't pay only for an accident. But any insurance policy that you purchase should pay for any form of death except a couple of reasons. Most insurance policies have what they call a suicide clause, which basically means if you commit suicide within a certain amount of time, the insurance policy won't pay. It's typically 2 years, okay? So I tease and tell people that if you're going to commit suicide, wait until after the suicide clause is over. Other reasons that we typically don't pay or insurance companies don't pay is if there's some type of criminal activity. A spouse kills another spouse because they're the beneficiary. A child kills a parent because of a beneficiary. But COVID, people are dying of COVID every day. And State Farm has really, really made sure that our agents understand and our policyholders understand that we are going to pay for the death of a patient if they die of COVID.
We have another question in the comment section. Is it better to get whole or term for a 40-year-old?
You know what, LaShondra, I think it just depends on the situation. It depends on, they're 40, but it's going to depend on their health, if they're a female, if they're a male. And a lot of it's going to depend on your budget. If you have a lower budget and you just can't afford a lot of insurance, term insurance is probably the best thing for you to do. If you've got a bigger budget and you can, kind of take the expense of a whole life policy, I would go ahead and invest in that. But what I tell people too, start off with one. So you may decide, I want to start off with a little term. And as you start to make more money and you pay off bills, you can go back and you can invest in a whole life policy, because you can have both and you can have as much insurance as you want. So not really a good answer. I would recommend that you meet with an insurance agent, let them do what we call a life needs analysis on you, which we ask you some questions about kind of what's going on, how many bills you have, how many assets you have, and then we can help determine based on your budget what's going to be best.
A lot of people have a policy within their job. And so I remember years ago, someone I know, they had a policy at work. They ended up leaving this particular job and they were starting another job in a few weeks. And in between, they passed away, unfortunately. What would you say to people about having a policy within their job, also having a policy outside of work?
I always tell people that if your employer is offering life insurance, get it. Get as much as you can. And even if they're offering that you can purchase life insurance, buy as much as you can afford, because you're not going to be able to find it cheaper than you would if you're in a big group. But you also need a policy outside of work, because that gives you freedom if you ever quit, or if you retire, or if you are terminated by that company. You want to have your own life insurance policy to fall back on. And if you decide to quit, or if you retire and you can afford to port that policy or take that policy with you, I recommend you do that as well. But I absolutely recommend that you have an insurance policy outside of work.
Considering you've been doing this for a number of years, what are some of the common mistakes you've also seen people make that you wish that you could just go around to every single person and tell them and over again, that you feel yourself going back and forth with people?
Probably one of the most common things that we see is me and my team, we probably quote 100 to 200 people a year in insurance. And if we close 50% of those, it's a good year for us. Most people don't follow back up. We'll call them 2 or 3 times and say, hey, we're following up on your life insurance quote. Would you like to go ahead and get started? I've got plenty of time to do that. And then something happens, they pass away, or they have a terminal illness, or they lose their job and they're not able to follow through. So that's one of the biggest things we see is people just don't follow through. Another thing that we see is people just don't think it's important. They invest in shoes, they invest in clothes, they invest in other things, but they don't take the time to invest. And I tell people, life insurance is the only insurance that you can guarantee it's going to pay out, because everybody is going to eventually pass away. So for me, it's the most important insurance you should have. It's more important than auto insurance and homeowners insurance and even health insurance. So those are the 2 biggest things. People think they don't need it, and people say, I'm going to wait. And then you get COVID or you get cancer, and then you can't even qualify to have it because now you've got all these pre-existing conditions. So those 2 things are the most, I'd say, Greg.
When it comes to families, a lot of people, I was talking to a friend of mine a couple of years ago, and it's a husband and wife, they have children, and they were talking about life insurance because they didn't have it. And I said, you need to get this done as soon as possible. Why is it so important that, because a lot of people don't realize when you lose, if you're depending on a 2-income household, you lose one of those incomes, how important is it to make sure that your family is protected?
I speaking personally for myself, I mean, I could tell you a ton of personal stories about why I think it's so important. I just think with everything we have going on in the world, when you lose a loved one, it's really important that you have time to grieve. Mm-hmm. You can grieve so much easier if you don't have to worry about your finances, how you're going to pay your bills, how you're going to pay, something off, how you're going to be able to afford to carry on without that income. So I think it's really important for the entire family. I think it's even important for your children to understand how important it is to have life insurance. So I'd say that that's the number one thing, especially people, that are thinking about getting married, or people that are married. It's important that your spouse has insurance just in case something happens.
As we wrap up tonight, is there anything else you would like to say before we wrap up and close out tonight's conversation?
The biggest thing is, Greg, thank you so much for having me on. I love you. And I really think it's super, super important to have life insurance. And people tend to be afraid to talk about death. They're afraid to talk about what happens if they die. And I have a lot of men that say, I don't want to have a big life insurance policy on myself because my wife is just going to marry somebody else. But you shouldn't care about that, because when you're deceased, you're gone, but you're leaving a family here that will need some additional money or your income replacement to survive. So the biggest thing for me is if you have an insurance agent now, most insurance agents also sell life insurance. So take some time. We're being creative. We're on Zoom, we're on the phone, we can email you quotes, that type of thing, to just talk about life insurance. And don't just talk about it, do it.
Do it. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us tonight again. Where can people find you online, or where can we call you if they want to get more information?
Well, you can find, and I have an incredible team, so I'm going to take 2 seconds and brag about them as well.
Go ahead.
Okay, so Jennifer Moten and Michael Williams are a part of my team, and we've got another exciting person that's going to join us soon, but I can't tell you who he is. But you can find all of us on Facebook. We've got a State Farm Facebook page. I have a personal State Farm page. I have a State Farm page. I have a personal page, and I'm also on Instagram and Twitter. You can call our office at 698-2403. You can follow us or catch us on the statefarm.com app. So you can catch me just about anywhere in Chattanooga and in Tennessee and in Georgia. So even if you live in Georgia or you live in another part of Tennessee, we can still write life insurance on you.
And finally, for you, what is it like for you to be able to help so many families? Because I can only imagine the families you've been able to help this far in your career. But what has it been like for you to be able to see that you're able to be that barrier to help families to plan for the future, no matter what happens?
You know what? I try to embody my job. I don't just sell insurance. I sell a promise. And the fact that I can sit down with someone and tell them if something happens to your family or something happens to you, you can call me and I can make sure that your family's taken care of. To me, I'm not just selling a promise, I'm selling myself. And I'm selling State Farm, that I had that much confidence in the company that we are. And so it means the world to me to be, and I've been able to do that over the last 15 years, Greg. I have given customers more insurance checks because they've lost a loved one. And even though it's a very sad time, it makes me feel really good that I can help them move on with their life and to grieve.
And one thing I just saw, Sharon Loving says, it's also important to periodically review your policy to make sure it still meets the needs and it is what you want.
Yes, Sharon, who's also a great friend of mine. Thank you. It is absolutely important to do that. What I try to tell people is every time you have a life event, you need to call your insurance agent. So if you get married, if you get divorced, if you have a baby, if you lose a child, if you lose a parent, anytime you have a life event, call your insurance agent and do a policy review.
Sounds good. Stephanie, I really appreciate you talking to me tonight. Great information, and we'll have to do it again soon.
Can I say one other quick thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Beneficiaries, please make sure that you have beneficiaries on your life insurance policies. That's also very important. And it's also good to review that every now and then too, just in case you need to make a change.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't like to talk about it. And I'm going to say this personally. I've had this discussion with my parents, my brother, and I jokingly talk about it. A lot of people know this. I used to want to be a mortician. And so the funny thing about it is my brother ended up marrying a girl whose dad owns a funeral home back home. So we talk about it all the time. And I think we need to make this a conversation in all families, because this is something we all have to go at some point, and it's better to be prepared than not be prepared.
Amen. Amen.
Stephanie, it was good talking to you, my friend, and we'll talk soon.
Okay. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.